first speaker that we're going to hear from is Lesley Orr from the Iona community. Lesley's from Edinburgh. She's been involved in peacemaking and solidarity campaigns at home and abroad. She's taught religious history, practical theology, and gender studies at Glasgow, Edinburgh, and Queen Margaret universities, and has worked for the Scottish Government's strategy to address violence against women. She has a long-standing passion for challenging gender-based abuse and violence in faith communities and in wider society, and was consultant to the World Council of Churches' Decade to Overcoming Violence that happened between 2001 and 2010, and was named Woman of Influence 2012 by Action for Children Scotland, although it certainly continues to be a Woman of Influence in 2015. Lesley, thank you.
Thanks, Emma. It's very good to be here today and to be part of this strong and interesting gathering of women in Scotland. Back in the early 90s, I was a volunteer at my local women's aid group. One day I had a long conversation with an older woman who'd been in refuge for a few weeks. I'd seen a big change in her during that time. She was relaxing. She had been anxious and doubtful when she arrived, but gradually she found the courage to cry and laugh. Her self-esteem blossomed as she shared stories and laughter with the others. She said that being in the safe environment of the refuge felt like the door opening to the possibility that life could be different. A life where her rights were respected and her true self had space to breathe. I knew that her Christian faith was important to her, so I asked if she felt able to confide in her minister or friends in the church. A look of absolute horror crossed her face, and she said, "Oh no, church was the last place where I would have spoken about what was going on at home. Who would have believed me? And what would they think of me?" She spoke about her congregation as like a kind of tyranny of respectability, where everyone seemed to be playing happy families, but nobody was being honest about their lives. That conversation stayed with me. It made me really angry. It also disturbed me, for surely the Christian story was meant to be good news of love, compassion, justice for the poor, for the oppressed, for those in captivity. It was from that point that later on I began to undertake a project about Christianity and violence against women in Scotland. And during those 2 years, I heard repeated umpteen times a depressing litany of women being disbelieved, scrutinized, blamed, judged, silenced, ostracized, counseled to return to dangerous situations, told that marriage was sacred and therefore inviolable, told that they should do all they could not to provoke their husbands, that Christ suffered and sacrificed his life, and so they should be willing to do likewise, and the pathological counsel to forgive the abuser, all of which meant that women were being asked to carry the burden of blame and shame and responsibility, while the men who were destroying their lives were rarely held to account or called to change their behavior. Some of the doctrines and dogmas at the heart of traditional Christian theologies have been pretty toxic for the well-being of women the world over. Whether by malign or benevolent intent, the paternalistic authority of the church has not been good for women. Daddy does not know best. So it's no surprise, I think, that the women's liberation movement and the feminist organizations which emerged out of it, like Women's Aid, regarded Christian theology, traditions, and institutions as pretty much irredeemably patriarchal obstacles in the struggle for women's empowerment. The long history of the church, whether Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant, is a narrative predominantly about women's sexuality and their bodies being feared and controlled, subordinated and silenced, according to dualisms drawn really from classical philosophy, dividing soul from body, sacred from secular, holy and profane, male and female, and valuing the first of each of these pairs more than the other. Women, as Tertullian notoriously said, were the devil's gateway, responsible for human sin or useful for serving men, but certainly not of equal worth in the image of God. I'm a historian of religion, so I would be very happy to spend all day talking about this stuff. But that story is at odds with my own personal experience. I grew up in a family in a faith community in an Edinburgh housing scheme, which affirmed, encouraged, and loved me equally with my brothers. My parents valued space for action, autonomy, and responsibility, regardless of the traditional gender norms. They were committed to social action and political engagement for justice, to make this world a better place. At the heart of my upbringing, for which I am profoundly grateful, was a radical story, a story of Jesus challenging the taboos and conventions of his ancient Near East society, transgressing traditional patriarchal family values, speaking truth to power, transforming people's lives, confronting the imperial domination system with an alternative, egalitarian vision of hope and community, and welcoming everyone to that feast. As one feminist theologian says, the life of Jesus Christ is at odds with the sexist theology of complementarity, the racist theology of white superiority, the clerical theology of cultic privilege, the political theology of exploitation and economic justice, and the patriarchal theology of male dominance and control. My formation, which was rooted in the ecumenical Iona community, of which my dad was a member and I'm a member, ecumenical, open, inclusive, but that's another story, I realised as I grew up was far from typical of 20th century Christian Scotland, but not unique. It was woven by a golden thread of faith, resisting the captivity and the taming of that movement, that early radical movement, by establishment structures and institutions. In my childhood, the faith story I learned to live by was not overtly feminist, but by God, it shaped my passion and commitment to the struggle for gender justice in church and world. It grounds my deepest motivations and desires. It's not about doctrines or creeds, but it's a continuing critical engagement. It swirls and dances in and out of my journey through life. Are faith and feminism compatible? That's really the question that I think is at the heart of this open space. And it begs many more questions. Faith in what or whom? In God, the sacred, the divine? How do we talk about those things? What language, what images do we use? Faith in a special holy book or set of texts, a church or community? Faith in values or causes? Faith in ourselves as women and human beings? Faith in nature, in the world? Faith in the future? Faith that the way things are is not the way they have to be? Is faith about obedience to unquestioned authority? Or is it about seeking meaning and significance, ways of understanding, exploring, and loving the material, the ambiguity, and the mystery of being alive on this planet? I don't presume to have answers for myself, and certainly not for the rest of us in all our complex diversity. I simply want to claim the authority and the right to ask those questions. That authority and that right is at the heart of this business. And to share a few fragments of my own faith as a feminist. when I think about it, there are three marks, really, for my story, for my faith as a feminist. The first is that it seeks an empowering story to live by. The second is that it wants a hospitable, egalitarian, supportive, and challenging community to belong to. And the third thing is that I want to hold on to a vision and a hope of compassionate justice and integrity for all people and for the earth. And for me, this has a very simple lodestone. For me, coming, from where I've come from on this journey, at the heart of the Christian gospel is a promise. Jesus says, "My reason for being here," his reason for being here and doing what I'm doing, is so that people might have abundant life. To use the technical language, that is my hermeneutical key. Does a faith, a community, a religion, a social movement, an ideology, a relationship, does it bring liberation and life or oppression and death? Does it do that for girls and women? Is it good news or bad news for us? Whenever I've been confronted with the claims and injunctions of religions and political systems, and more particularly with the actions which embody and reveal where privilege, power, and motivation lie, and what we truly value, because it's what we do that shows what we value, my question is always this: does this affirm and enhance the struggle to bring a fuller, fairer, and more abundant experience of living, especially for those who are at the raw edge of poverty or abuse, exploitation, illness, discrimination? Does it connect and speak to their experiences? If not, it isn't a good story to live by or a good faith to feminists. And what I heard so often when I was doing my research was women telling and giving examples of a story which was a bad story in their lives, which constrained and coerced and limited them instead of allowing them to breathe. Is faith about spirituality? That's not a word I like very much. It kind of suggests, special holy things that people do to make them better or make them closer to heaven. But I do hope that I'm a woman of spirit, because the roots of that word signify not special, abstract, holy things, but whatever animates and breathes and energizes us. The Spirit enlivens. And for me, and this is really, you can tell I'm a member of the Iona community and that's my kind of rooting, because that is not about being part of a different realm, transcending this earthy, carnal world. It's about getting messy, getting your hands dirty in the world, but in order to transfigure and transform in the midst of this. We need ceremony to mark and help us bear the weight of key moments and transitions, the deep mysteries of birth, love, yearning, and death. Religious traditions have long been the custodians of symbol and ritual. But if, as one of my friends said, if the church and other religions have become graveyards for dead metaphors, they have lost the power to touch and carry and heal and transform. Feminists seek to draw on many traditions and resources to create language, sanctuaries, and ceremonies rooted and connected to our lives as women and as human beings. The room for hope to enter, the space where we are freed. Feminist faith creates safe space to share stories of hurt, hope, and resistance, and claims authorization to be interpreters and arbiters of our own lives. And being a historian, I just want to finish with the words of one of my heroines, a woman called Annie Small, who was the first principal of the Women's Missionary College in Edinburgh at the turn of the 19th into the 20th century. She was a remarkable woman, and I'll not tell you all her story, but she challenged convention and encouraged women to be explorers and adventurers in faith. And she said this thing, and to me this is a lovely kind of summation of the best of faith. Faith seizes the human passion of love and transforms it into a passion to embrace the whole world. With confidence, I ride the crest of the creation wave. Thanks.